Okay, call to order the organizational meeting of.
The new guys know they can be up here, right?
Oh,
Susan, you go right, come up, you come up right away.
well, we do the pledge first.
They can be up.
We're a little. You can come.
We could make this a little more quick.
Okay, so we'll stand for the pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So if Susan and Jennifer want to go over to the side there, we'll do the oath of office.
We decided which side now.
Okay.
Okay, so raise your right hand. You can do it together, yeah. So just say your own name. I say your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States. Repeat it. I'm not gonna do the whole thing, I think you memorize the whole thing all at once, so I'll start over.
I, Susan Easton. I, Jennifer Stedman.
Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will uphold the Constitution of the United States. Do solemnly swear that I will uphold the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the state.
And the Constitution of the state. And the Constitution of the state.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties.
And that I will faithfully discharge the duties. And that I will faithfully discharge the duties.
Of the office of member.
Of the office of member. Of the office of member.
Of the Board of Education.
Of the Board of Education. Of the Board of Education.
Of Saline Area Schools.
Of Saline Area Schools. Of Saline Area Schools.
Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Washtenaw County, Michigan. Washtenaw County, Michigan.
According to the best of my abilities.
According to the best of my abilities. According to the best of my abilities.
Very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll have the election of officers, and we will have a motion for each office in a second, and then we'll vote on each one individually. So, and I have a motion for the office of president.
I would like to nominate Paul Heineck as president.
I have a second on there.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, that president carries 7-0. And I have the chair will motion Secretary Fanas for vice president. Can I have a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. Can I have a motion for the secretary?
I would like to motion this guy right here.
Name helps.
Trustee Michael, Trustee McVeigh.
No, Mike McVeigh, sorry, for secretary.
Is it official when she says it that way?
I'll second that.
I have to tell you, I have a relative
So
by
second.
McVeigh name, and so I always have a brain freeze, so. When I do that, it's because I'm having a brain freeze.
Got it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. Okay.
Sorry.
So now where do we go? Oh, can I have a motion, recommend motion to adjourn the organizational meeting, January 8, 2019 at 6:35.
So moved.
Support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0.
We all three just need to show down.
Okay.
A little dancing around here.
Madam Chair.
It's magic.
You can ask, you can trade places.
Smoothest transition. Yeah.
This is a smooth transition.
I think so.
All right, I'd like to call to order the regular board meeting of Monday, January 5th,
8th, 2019. Welcome everyone and Happy New Year. Welcome Trustee Stebbin
Thank
and
you.
Trustee Eastep to the board. And still another thank you to Trustee Hummel and Trustee Delhay who are not here. Welcome Miranda, our new house lady, our new Assistant Superintendent of Finance. You got it. This is the first opportunity for public comment. A member of the public may make up to 3 minutes to address the board. Does anyone have any public comment?
Good evening, Andrews Crates with the Foundation for Saline Area Schools. Happy New Year to all. Just wanted to give you a quick update. Since September of 18, we have already awarded $65,000 to teaching grants, building grants, district grants, partnership grants, and student-led grants, hopefully with a lot more to follow in the next months to come. Very exciting. Also, our big fundraiser, Snow Blast, is coming up, so specifically wanted to tell you about that tonight. It's going to be on Saturday, February 2nd at Travis Point Country Club, 6 to 11. Would love to see all of you there. Again, our big fundraiser to raise more money for the wonderful foundation. As like we have in the last past years, we have a live auction, silent auction, wine pull, gift card wheel. This year is going to be a wonderful theme that you will all appreciate, the greatest school district on earth. And thanks to all of you, you helped make that happen. So with the Greatest Showman theme, we are very excited. And Imagine Theater is again, or Imagine Entertainment is again going to be our presenting sponsor. David Helmer will be our auctioneer, and we are just very excited about it. So again, I hope that you can all come. Registration is live online on our website. And again, thank you for all you do. Welcome to the new members. Welcome to our new Assistant Superintendent of Finance. And again, thank you always for all your support.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Administration?
Just a couple of things. Want to make sure to thank all of the staff over the last couple of weeks. Many of us were off doing some exciting things, excuse me, but we had a lot of staff that did a lot of work. The Buildings and Grounds Department and others went through and made a lot of improvements to our facilities for the remainder of the year, so we're excited about that. And really, starting today with our administrative meeting and some other meetings we've had, our planning has kind of hit the ground running for the 1920 school year, and so we certainly have made the turn and are really focusing on making sure that this year continues to go along well, and then focused on next year.
Board? Yep.
Sorry. MASB has some training coming up. We have new board member training handled at the Washington ISD, and also in the weekend of February 6th in Detroit. There's another weekend of all kinds of CBA credits and training for new board members. Thank you, you got the brochure. So I want to encourage all of you to look at what you might have missing in your portfolio of CBA credits for board members, and see what we can do to make sure we've got the best training that we can get. Okay?
Yeah, and on that, on Saturday, February 9th, I right now plan on going down there if anyone wants to drive down. It's in Detroit, so
Great.
if anybody wants to go, I'll be driving.
And for the new and some of the old board members, they are moving a lot of the 100 level CBAs online. And in fact, I asked a question today and was roped into reviewing one of them. So they're pretty robust and they're pretty well done. So they're using a lot of new tools. And from an instructional design perspective, they're pretty solid. So you can knock those off really quickly as a 100 level member. Maybe we can set the goal of being a certified board by every one of us getting all 900 levels taken care of. Maybe. We'll see.
A good goal.
It is a good goal.
I've got 6 years. I can't do it.
You should be able to.
I should be okay.
The deadline is 3 weeks from now.
Speaking of the committee list, I will distribute later, and everyone please let me know your interests on the committee list, and at our retreat next week we'll wrap that up, make assignments. What else did I have? On behalf of the board and the administration, I'd like to offer condolences to Matt Stimick and his family. They had a loss last week, so keep Stimick family your thoughts and prayers this week, please. Anything else, anyone?
How about the high school report?
I just want to talk quickly about a new student leadership group at the high school. They call themselves the Student Voice, and they're associated with the Student Council. So hopefully you guys will be seeing some stuff from them soon.
Kind of a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify with aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. Scheduled reports, the standard space grading with Dr. Locke.
Dr. Lodge is going to get set up, and I think we'll invite the other folks from the crowd that are going to be doing with us. Talking to us a little bit about standards-based grading and some of the aspects of that. I think it's important for the board to understand some of the instructional facets associated with standards-based learning and why we see this continuing to grow. So, Dr. Lodge.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity for us to be able to talk about this. We've got a number of people with us tonight. We have Lauren Henson and Laura Washington from Heritage, Emily Stickler, Laura Odom, and Brad Vizu from the middle school. We're going to talk about standards-based learning. The reason why we actually don't have K-3 represented up here is K-3 has already been that standards-based focus for some time. And Heritage and the middle school are making a transition to be more focused on standards-based learning. So we're going to talk more about updates and where we're going with that and the direction. So I'm here to just kick it off. Let's see. To talk really about briefly what is it and how does it support our learner profile. So when you talk about standards-based learning, what it primarily is focused on students having mastery of standards. And that's important because in a more traditional model, the focus is sometimes we're completing assignments and students are focused on a grade, whether they're getting an A, B, C, D. In a model that supports standards-based learning, just the focus is for the students to take ownership of the standards and demonstrate their mastery, which often means that has to go to a higher level for that to occur. And it fits in really well with our learner profile. Really, we could take a look at all the student attributes and talk about how it supports all of those, but really if you're just looking at the center of the learner profile and you look at the 4 C's and you look at communication, standards-based learning really allows for greater different ways for students to communicate their learning. Collaboration, very important in a standards-based model because it sets up students to work together. We know that learning is really social and that students, just like they would in the workplace, need opportunities to work together to collaborate, to demonstrate their mastery of specific standards. Critical thinking, we know that critical thinking and problem solving are really important. And in a standards-based model, it almost forces students to go deeper into the work to prove that they have mastery over a specific standard. And then creativity, also something that we know is really important in the workplace. More and more we're recognizing that employers want creative-minded people to come in and help them solve problems. And in a standards-based environment, it certainly allows for that. So with that said, we're going to keep plugging along. Okay. Our story.
So, as Dr. Lotch indicated, the K-3 already uses a standards-based report card. So that has been in place for many, many years here in Saline. What we're trying to do is bridge that gap a bit between K-3, 4, 5, and then 7, 8.
Standards-based isn't new. This is something that used to be called mastery learning, and there's been different renditions of it. We at Saline Middle School have had teams doing it for 4 or 5 years. So we reached a critical point this past summer where almost half of our school was operating on a standards-based language. And we were fortunate enough to have nationally renowned SBL expert Rick Wormley join us for a day of learning this summer. We had over 90 teachers from Saline Middle School, Heritage, a group from Milan Middle School, learn and talk more about standards-based learning, differentiation. So we've reached that point now where we're either in or we're not as a school because we were starting to confuse our parents with regards to a common language. So it's not a new thing. From my perspective, I'll always talk about it from a social emotional aspect. We watch movies like Angst and Race to the Top and Race to Nowhere, and then we go back to the grade chase and grade writing and A- and B+, and what does that really mean? So this gives us a structure, especially at the middle school, where we don't have to worry about the grade chase. We don't have to worry about if it's 89 or 90 or A- or B+. We can just learn for learning's sake. And that's a piece for me that takes a little bit of that pressure off of learning, off of assessment, off of high stakes stuff. And that was important to us as we kind of told this story of standards-based learning.
So that idea, going off of what Brad said, you've seen these pictures. You've seen like the old school, everyone in rows, the teacher in the front. And we made that shift. And all of you have been in classrooms and you've seen our learning spaces have changed. Our pedagogy has changed. But what we also have to do is we have to have the assessments change too. And so right now, that idea of the paper comes home and you have this paper with a 92%, okay, that's fine. And I'm just gonna file that away, recycle that. We need to change the direction of that. We need to communicate better. So what we're trying to do is, we've done some of this work already, but what we have to do to complete that circle is we have to change that assessment so it better matches that what it looks like on the right-hand side. So we'll have some examples from teachers who have made that shift.
This was some of the work that we did, and I brought a copy of the book today. This is our book study this year, and I'll pass this around if anyone wants to take a look. But it's some of Rick's work, and just kind of as a guide for us as we do this work.
Hey, Brad, real quick. Yeah, I did want to point out that this is a good example of how we partner with the Foundation for Saline Area Schools. They supported the financial arrangement for Rick Wormelli to come and do the professional development for Saline Middle School and some of the heritage teachers that attended too, and some of the high school teachers. So I just want to point that out, that they are a great partner of ours.
So that's some of the reading that we can go a little bit further with. Sometimes in life, you get one shot at things, and you get a shot to pass a test, and it's a high stakes thing. But a lot of times in life, you get many shots. You get a chance to redo things and retake things. And we just included this slide because I think it's important, everything from the bar exam, SAT, ACTs, it's not just one score in life that you're judged at. We want to know what you really know and understand. And learning isn't one spot in time. Learning can be a continuum of time. So I think in looking at this and showing, it's really about this discussion that we're having with our students about how you did and how you can do better. You get to improve, and I think that was a part. So all of these examples that we gave, all of them can be redone over and over for full credit, and that's kind of the approach here. We'll go to Laura and Lauren for heritage exams.
Sure, and to go back to our why, I think in Heritage we have, ours was twofold. One, we didn't feel, which Lauren will talk about in a minute as well, the idea of what kids really know. We didn't feel that we were giving enough information to our families, to our students, about what they truly know and what they need to be assessed on. And so very similar to the middle school, that was one of our whys. And I think even more importantly than that, our kids are 9 and when they start 4th grade for the most part. And so that is when the flip in Power School happens. And so our kids are receiving A, B, C's, and D's for the first time. And for some of them, that is a very novel concept. So you have to figure, like at 9 years old, what are they getting out of seeing an A, a B, or a C versus if they could have some really good feedback.
So how standards-based grading has changed the feedback in my classroom is instead of giving a letter grade to a variety of skills, I am focusing on one skill and giving feedback with a rubric. So the feedback is able to be more focused, and if you can see the success criteria, it's also, the feedback is more objective across the board for each and every student. So I have noticed a great impact in that for my teaching because I'm better able to see where students are and where specifically they need to go based on the feedback to push them along. And then for students, it's a great opportunity because they get to see, okay, where am I at? They have the objective feedback right in front of them for that specific skill so that they can see where do I need to push myself. So it's been a great way for them to be motivated and self-directed and pushing themselves to that next level. Where, oh, sorry, I was gonna say where a letter grade, it's a letter grade for all these different skills, and so it's what skill do I need to improve on, where do I need to go, when that one letter grade is representing all of those skills. So.
And from the parent perspective, it's so nice to get one part of a rubric versus getting the whole thing and not knowing where to start the conversation. So the conversations at home are very, very different because we can focus on one thing. This is what we need to work on, this is what's going well, not going well, and it's just really changed the communication in our home and how I can support my child versus, I don't know. It's been great.
So I love that I'm going next and going right after Laura because you just gave me a platform to jump off of here. All right, so about 6 years ago, I embarked on my standards-based learning journey. So the one thing that I didn't want to do was completely reinvent the wheel. I knew what content and curriculum I needed to teach. It was more just how am I going to teach that, how am I going to assess that? So I'm giving you this example from like circa 2012 or something like that. Okay, so economics. I have to teach about how economic systems work, how an economy works, how citizens are affected. So I used to have a series of activities and assignments, and I would grade all of those, and at the very end, I would have a quiz. And it would just be a cumulative quiz. You'd have your total number correct over the number of questions there were. And as you just said, Laura, when you go back home, this student with their 10 out of 13 is gonna go home and say, I'm not really sure what I understood and what I didn't understand. So if we could go to the next slide, this is, thanks. This is, I'm still teaching economics, but now I give a learning target. So like I want it to be very transparent. What you are supposed to learn is that you can use economic terminology to explain how an economy works. And then here at the bottom, just like you were talking, Lauren, there's always gonna be a rubric. Here's the criteria that tells you if you can do these things, if I can check off all these boxes, then you have demonstrated mastery of that particular standard. So the conversation at home around the dinner table this time is, okay, I was able to do this criteria and this criteria, but this is the particular thing that I need to work on, and I have time to work on it with standards-based, because you have formative assessments before you have your grade, like your summative assessment, that's your test. So this person knows particularly where they have to focus their energy.
The power for me is the idea of not yet. You may have this mastered, you may know this concept, but students have a chance to get there. So we're not yet there, and I think that that's a good way to frame this as we go through this.
And the conversation is not, I got an 84%.
Right.
Like they can talk about the learning. And I think when you go into classrooms, it's so powerful to say, what are you learning? They can really speak to that because of what is set up with this type of system.
And back to, actually, so we use a grading system, and I say grading with quotation marks here, SPML, which I think maybe you guys are gonna talk about. So we don't talk about letter grades, we don't talk about percentages, but rather just what is your proficiency level? Like, are you really secure in what you're learning? And we kind of modeled that off of our K-3 because they're already familiar with that. The students are, the families are. So are you secure? Are you feeling like you've mastered it, but like maybe there's a little bit more that you need to work on, maybe you're not super consistent, or are you progressing? And this is a typical formative assessment in that you still have growth, you still have work to do, but you know what work it is that you need to do. And we'll help you reach that, so that hopefully by your summative assessment, you're secure.
So there's certainly more to come, but we felt like we were at the point that we needed to come today before you and at least give you a good kickoff of where we're at with regards to standards-based learning. Any questions just from our group tonight?
Secure, mastered, progressing, and
Limited.
limited. Thank you.
So we don't use any zeros, like, you know, if somebody doesn't show that they are progressing, then they're always going to be at an L, which is a 50%.
And this is a hard thing. I'm just as guilty with my two sons of, you have a B plus, get back in there and get the A minus, whatever that means. I want them to have an A, whereas this is a total mind shift. And this is hard for our grade-driven community and parents that, no, let's talk about, do you have it, do you get it, or not yet?
I'll also say that I haven't put a single letter grade or a percentage score on any of the work that I have sent home this year or that students have received back, even though there's a percentage score going into Power School. And I'll also say that students have never been more aware of where they are at in meeting standards and skills.
And I can attest to that. So my daughter is in Lauren's class, and that is 100% true. I feel this year I have been absolutely more informed than I have been as a parent. So that is an accurate statement.
I'll address something that people often wonder when you start talking standards-based at the middle school. They say, well, does this automatically translate then? Is this going to happen in high school?
That's exactly what I was going to
Okay.
I'm like, David's sitting down.
The answer to that is, we still are under the parameters of a lot of issues with transcripts and how this translates back to grades and GPA when you're looking at college admittance and all of that. And so I would say that there aren't direct plans to move the entire high school to standards-based. That's not standards-based grading, at least. But there's a number of standards-based types of learning initiatives taking place. For example, looking more at how we're going to be working on doing more performance assessment in high school. That's a standards-based type of approach, even though you're not necessarily saying that this all translates into doing away with letter grades and GPA and all of that. So that's hopefully the answer you might ask or you might inquire about regarding high school.
I think the other comment that I would give is like Laura, I have a fourth grader, I have two fourth graders, so what you were saying about 9-year-old children totally resonates with me because I have two, one sitting right there, and I know you're saying right now. And we're not a classroom that's fully on this. And so my question, my heritage-focused question, and I have a question for the middle school, is what does heritage look like right now in terms of a class, like it's Lauren?
Yes.
Lauren Henson? Okay. Like Lauren's classroom versus the rest of the building, like where are you in that progression? And is the plan and time, what is the plan and timeline?
Yes, that's a fair question. So we are definitely behind the middle school in the sense of when I was the assistant principal at the middle school, Laura and group were definitely working on this. And so when I transitioned into the heritage role, this was definitely something like, we need to take a look at that. So that was what, two and a half years ago. And we are in the preliminary stages for certain. We have some teachers who have jumped on, we have some teachers who are still working at that. I think the difference between a K-5, K-6, and 7-8 is that we have multiple subjects. And so we might be standards-based in math, because that's just it's a place to start, or in ELA, versus Laura, who can be, all standards-based because she teaches social studies. And so we are, as of right now, we have a committee working at Heritage. There are about, 12, 15 on that committee who are starting to dive into standards to see where our jumping point can be.
But I would say from a district perspective, ultimately we do want Heritage as a school to eventually be standards-based, like is happening with K-3 when they report out. They're not reporting letter grades.
And it's really important that we could say next year you're all standards, and it's just like, I'm gonna take away that worksheet and give you an iPad and it's the same work. It's the pedagogical change and shift that needs to happen, so that's why we put so much time and energy into having Rick come and to be doing this book study and to understand that shift and spending a lot of time to do that, because we want the change to be not just now you don't have an A, now you have an S. We want the shift to be the communication, what does the grade need in that piece? And that just takes time for our staff to be able to make that shift.
Yeah, and I think to Brad's point earlier, it really does have an emotional impact on students. I mean, I saw it going from 3rd to 4th, that's what I know, right? But I think especially at the middle school, with that age group, this is a positive reinforcement.
Is the rubrics pretty similar from classroom to classroom, or does that change depending on the teacher, I guess?
You mean the rubric by, just to clarify, the rubric.
The rubric by which they're doing the
Or the
standard
rubric
piece.
per standard.
Per standard, so like, Laura, you.
Yeah, so like if we went back to like my economics
Yeah.
assessment, yeah. So I feel like it, as a 7th grade social studies teacher, we have 4 teachers. One is Summit, and then we have like a half-time teacher and then 2 full-time teachers. So I feel like we come up with our learning standards, and then how we assess it might vary a little bit. We all share our work, but it wouldn't necessarily be 100% the same across all teachers.
But the rubric is pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same, and we
work
always give
together.
it right away. So like they know this is their target.
Okay.
So it's not like I give this to them at assessment time, I give it to them at the beginning. So like, here's what you're gonna have to be able to do. Yeah.
Great.
I would agree with that. The teachers that I have worked with, we have worked together to look at our curriculum and then making sure that that's aligned to the standards, and we create the rubrics off of that, and then we kind of share that. So I can't say that every single 4th grade teacher is using those rubrics, but the people who are, I think, really trying to implement the standards-based practices are using some type of rubric that has the common learning target or goal.
So that's close, so you don't have, like, the same student could be in 2 different classes and get a completely different.
I
think that that's going to be more common without a rubric.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so if there's some consistency.
And I think that's with any classroom, whether it's standards-based or traditional. Like you have a teacher who is teaching the way they teach, and it's never gonna be the exact same in every classroom. Yeah. But overall, it's a similar experience.
I like the fact that it's focusing more on the learning than the grade. And thank you for moving in that direction, because we do want to make sure all our kids that are graduating know how to learn and not, okay, I've accomplished this grade and forgotten everything, but they know that working and learning is part of what we're doing here.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Action items. Can I have a motion to approve the Clark Construction GMP price increase in the amount of $2,432,799.60 based upon construction documents issued by GMP Architecture and Engineering dated November 28, 2018 for bid package number 1, Saline Middle School renovations project as submitted by Superintendent Grady?
So moved.
Support.
All right, in that big pack, couple points of clarification. This is really the first of three bid packs and maybe a 4th, depending on how our bid coverage goes, that you will be seeing. The memo articulates this as an increase, and I want to explain a little bit about that. Our folks from Clark Construction handled our first series, and actually Gary Steller, Matt Weeklock-Ski is here, are here to, if we have any questions for them. That work was completed. They did a great job with that. We chose to maintain our relationship with them, and now they've extended that. So by extending that, essentially what they're saying is that an initial contract that we had for the first 2 summers of 16 and 17, is being increased by this amount. That does not mean this is an increase over budget. It simply articulates that we are adding additional work to their initial GMP, which is their guaranteed maximum price. So when you see the 2.43 number, it's inclusive with inside our budget. We have about $2.5 million approximately budgeted for the middle school science rooms. I will tell you, we are very tight. It's a challenging market from a construction cost standpoint. It's a challenging market from a bid coverage standpoint. We have a couple of areas that did not receive coverage. We're working with a couple of the contractors to see if they can take that on or if there are other solutions there. So with that said, we feel like we have a strong group of contractors assigned to do the work. They work diligently over break to meet with the contractors that had bid and do the pre-bid clarifications to make sure they captured everything they needed in the bond proposal or in the bid packs. I will tell you, we had a issue with the initial low bid in the electrical area. They had missed an area, so we were able to move quickly and go with O'Donnell who has done work for us in the past. Several of the contractors that we're working with have done work in the past, and Clark has relationships with all of the contractors that we are looking to award tonight. So, questions from the board?
So
Thank you for clarifying the whole.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
truly an increase, it's more of an extension.
so it's essentially the 2018 work that's added onto the contract of 16, 17.
Correct, yeah.
And going forward, we'll get, as the new bid packages come out, we'll get these.
Yeah, I mean, their work will continue to technically increase, but, because they will continue to add work to the initial contract. So it is at a lower, it is at a lower percentage. Their fees are in there, so I appreciate Clark working with us on that.
They're starting the day school ends.
Yes, this summer is extremely tight, particularly this project, and because it's in a school building. As you know, this is the probably the worst summer. Sorry guys, we are getting out based on a post-Labor Day start, and we are beginning based on a pre-Labor Day start. And so this summer will be the tight summer. We may look at a couple of things. I know one of the electrical folks was asking if they could come in over spring break and do some of the back installing. We have some panels and things that they move, and they may have a chance to put some things in place so that when they come back in the summer, they'll be able to move. The other aspect of this project is that some of the trades can't be in there at the same time, and so we're doing some concrete floor polishing. We're putting an acoustical spray, and we're trying to make the spaces more kind of industrial and lab feel. So in doing so, they're going to be spraying the ceiling. We're not going to have other contractors in there. So working with Clark, we've talked about essentially second shifting some segments of the time in order to get the work done. I will say, Clark understands that this project needs to be done, and we need to be teaching science on the first day of school. Based on our experience with them the last 2 years, they are do whatever it takes to get it done organization, and so I'm confident we will be able to complete it. It's just going to be pretty busy.
It's essentially 9 weeks, right?
Yeah. And there is I will tell you, there is some abatement that needs to take place initially, part of the demo. That's another issue for us to make sure we're on top of that. There are VCT tile. Once you start popping that tile up, that technically needs to be abated, and so we'll be pulling that out. That front start is going to be a real important opportunity for us to move quickly.
I think it's very commendable that we got stuff done early so we could beat the rush on some of the bid packages to be able to meet those aggressive timelines. So thanks for all the work in making that happen.
Yeah, they appreciated working over the holidays. It was good. They have other conflicts with other work.
Any other questions?
I just want to make a comment because this was one of the first things I dug into to learn about, and I really wanted to say thank you to Scott, who spent a lot of time going over documents. The budget's a deep thing. Janice and I were able to spend some time together before she left. It'll be something I'll look forward to working with and learning from with Miranda and the rest of the board. So I appreciate all of the time that you spent helping to educate me on the bond.
All those in favor, please signify by aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. Kind of a motion to appoint the board's recording secretary, Patty Waltz, board secretary, Michael McVeigh, and superintendent Graydon to serve as the board's designees for posting legal notices.
So moved.
Support.
I'd like to say thank you for getting my name right.
Okay, I deserve it.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. Do you have a motion to approve Barry Livesey and Chris Mahalik to be the Saline Area Schools representatives on the Local Development Finance Authority for the City of Saline as recommended by Superintendent Graydon?
So moved.
Support.
Barry and Chris have been doing this for a couple of years now.
More. Yeah. More than that.
More than that, so they're good to go. Any questions? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. Discussion items, diversity, equity, and inclusion update, Superintendent Graydon.
All right, hold up here, and I would like to invite Shannon Washington forward to help with this presentation. I will let Ms. Washington introduce herself. Tell us a little bit about.
Hi, I'm Shannon Washington. I'm a parent in the district. I have a student at the high school and a student at Heritage in the 5th and 10th grade. And this is our 3rd year here in Saline. We moved from the Rochester area where I was a teacher for 11 years. And prior to that, I taught in Romulus. And then prior to that, I taught in Inkster, and I did my student teaching in Detroit. And my daughter started at the middle school for 8th grade, and my son started at Lincoln Meadows for 3rd grade. And then they changed buildings again, so they've seen a lot in a couple of years. And anything else you want me to say?
That's perfect.
Okay.
We're going to go over a little bit in terms of kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wanted to start with the first slide, which is a kind of a background.
Make sure it's on
slide.
green.
What's that?
Maybe on the side, it might be on red. It needs to be on green.
There we go. A little bit of background, and we'll talk more, particularly perhaps even at the board retreat, a little bit at least about our district framework. And as many of you are aware, we haven't talked about it at the board table recently in terms of our goal number 3, in terms of our interest in enhancing the positive school environment to promote student, staff well-being, satisfaction, and positive morale. And I think if you think about our framework, this is the goal, or the part of the goal that says Saline Area Schools needs to be a great place to live, a great place to work, and a great place to come and learn. And if we put together systems and have approaches that provide that great place to learn, our ability to be successful will greatly increase. So one of the key action steps, and literally the first one, was implement diversity awareness. You know, I think it's important for us to understand, we know kind of what we look like as a community, we know historically where we've been as a community, but yeah, we've identified that it's critical for us to continue to make progress in this area. The world, I've gotten used to this, the world does not look like Saline, and we are sending our students out into the world, and so it's incumbent upon us to really focus on that as an area of improvement for a variety of reasons. One of the things we've been doing for a little while has been involved with the Justice Leaders Core course lessons. We've had 10 plus senior school participants, staff that have been at the WISD and have been learning collaboratively with other districts across Washtenaw County and across the region, looking at things around the issues of social justice and bringing some of those approaches back to our school district, not only in terms of their work with students, but our work with other staff members, and ultimately from a policy standpoint. As you can see, a couple of years ago, we've had presentations from Dr. Jay Marks, and the board members that were at the opening presentation, the kickoff in August, you're familiar with that. But we also, back in August of 17, and again in January of 18, Dr. Marks came and presented to our administrative team, and really started with this concept of understanding our own identities as administrators, and what types of things did we bring to the table related to our own historical biases and other issues that we need to maybe put on the table in our own mind in terms of understanding where we start this work from. And I came back in January, we took a little bit of a deeper dive into how are we going to look from a cultural competencies approach in terms of our curriculum, policy, and really how we think about ourselves as an organization. And so we've been at this a little bit, but I think we've really started to move forward, and I will tell you, it's because what Ms. Washington shared with me is called the FACE case. And so I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the Heritage Institute.
So whenever there's a class action lawsuit, there's usually one case that kind of represents the class, and it's called the FACE case, and it's usually selected by whatever attorneys are representing those individuals. So I'm not an attorney, but for the way that I've gotten involved in this is there was an incident with a student, and the incident was in class, and the student, who was an African American male student, was called the N-word by a white classmate. And I happen to know the family, and I know both families and know both kids. And so when my initial learning about this was from the mother, who just kind of gave me a personal call as a friend and explained to me what happened. And after lots of conversation with her and knowing the other family, I kind of told her that if you would like for me to offer any insight that I might have given my background, having worked in education and also having served in the Rochester district. Kind of one of my unique experiences is that I was the only African American teacher in my building. I was the first, I was the only, and now that I'm gone, there is no one else. And so kind of that unique experience in working on several diversity committees and conducting trainings for my colleagues, I felt like I could have something to contribute here And so I told her if she felt comfortable, she could, kind of tell Laura to call me and we could, kind of start a conversation. And so that's kind of how we got involved. That's kind of how I got involved in connecting and having conversations with Laura and with Scott. But with this incident, I think what it did was it began a lot of conversations on a lot of different levels. This particular parent was frustrated with the way that it was handled. This was, as far as I know, her first time having her son be a victim of a racial incident or an interracial slur. And in talking to her, I found out that she had never been at the end of a racial slur. So it struck her maybe differently than it would have someone who had had some experience with this. So we, there have been other incidents. It just so happens that my son had been involved in an incident with this same kid a year before. And so I was familiar kind of with the situation. I'll just kind of leave it at that. This mom was really frustrated and she did take to social media. And so that kind of looped in a lot of people in the community who either knew her or had access to her podcast or her Facebook Live or whatever. And so there was this kind of simmering conversation about what is Saline doing, what has Saline done. And so I wanted to work as closely as I could if I was kind of given permission by the family to kind of be a part of the conversation there, and that's how that started. And so one of the things that Scott did, do you want me to keep going? Sure. Okay. One of the things that Scott did was he held these two community conversations, and one was at Kerrigan Cafe, and the other was here in this room. And having kind of an open forum with no agenda and kind of giving people an opportunity to speak about their thoughts, either related to the incident, because by this time, many people had seen the social media video, many people had talked to the family, there's a lot of conversation going on in the community. It kind of opened up the door for others to share their experiences. And so I know personally for my family, once this happened, both of my kids kind of had a heightened sense of awareness, and my youngest son felt empowered to confront and interrupt racial or racist behavior at a football game. And so, it didn't surprise me that he did it. It surprised me that he confronted a kid that was older than him and bigger than him. But clearly, so he's not afraid of that. But that may not have been the case had this original incident not happened. These conversations are happening in our home and all around us. So when Scott had these open conversations, the first one was mostly moms who, because it was during the day, mostly moms. And the thing that struck me was the intense amount of diversity in the room. I had not seen anything like this in Saline. I saw moms, there were a couple of African-American moms. There was a woman who was from the Middle East, a woman who was from I believe she was from Mexico, and then there were moms who had adopted parents, first-generation moms. I mean, there was this diversity that I hadn't actually seen all in one place. And then the second meeting, the diversity really intensified. We had parents who were from West Africa, parents from the Caribbean, and parents who had moved in from somewhere else to Saline who were minorities and had interesting experiences. And what I noticed was that in that forum, this is a very visible, vocal community that exists in Saline that you would not see at a Saline football game or a basketball game, because they're kind of extrapolated in the crowd. They will kind of blend in or even disappear. But when you put all of these voices with these similar experiences in the room, you start to hear the same stories over and over again. Different kids, different buildings, different families, but similar experiences. And so I feel like those conversations, those community conversations, were really helpful to kind of highlight a very vocal, visible community in Saline that you might not see in any other forum. And so these are some of the themes that came up in those conversations. People had lots of questions about hiring, and my unique experience, how I ended up in Rochester, was incredibly intentional. Rochester and Plymouth Canton were the focus of a newspaper article that I read. And in that article, the article was about how those two districts had a difficult time recruiting and retaining minority teachers. And at the time, I was not living in the United States, but I was going to move back here and I needed a job. And I felt a sense of responsibility to that issue. And so I went in search of those positions, and Plymouth Canton missed out, they never called me back, but Rochester called, and they were intentionally looking for minority teachers, and I decided I was going to be the one that they were going to recruit, and I was going to stay, and then I had to move. But that was 11 years later, so I did stay for a while, but it was an interesting journey because I kind of use this analogy. When I saw that article, it was like the bat signal in the sky. Like, this district needs help. These kids need to see people who don't look like them, who didn't grow up where they grew up, people who don't talk, walk, or act like them, come in and kind of represent a standard of excellence in education. And that was my experience. And so hiring was a big question in those conversations. Curricular options, kind of looking at what kids are learning and what they are celebrating and what they're not celebrating, and looking at the cultural implications of that. I don't know any teacher who doesn't have the right intention about making sure that kids get access to a diverse amount of material in every subject, but this is something that the district has to be intentional with, because the district will change. And if there's anything that I think Scott and I have agreed on, is that even if it's changing slowly, Saline wants to be ahead of that change and wants to be proactive there. And then one of the things that kind of goes back to the next case was that it was simply unclear how Saline handles issues of racial harassment. And we all know that every school building has a policy on bullying. But is that just the policy when it deals with issues of race? And that's kind of the question that we've been looking at, exploring, is there a separate way to deal with issues of race? And you can fill in that blank with other diversity or equity issues, but the conversation here started with race, particularly at the elementary school levels, because the policies are different at the upper L than it would be in the middle school. And kind of the example that I use is if I go out and I smack somebody, that's assault, but if I smack them and call them a racial name, that's a hate crime. And it's different. The slap might feel the same, but the racial slur has a different implication. Even in the law, it's considered something different. So to kind of look at that. So that is kind of how I got involved, and those were the first conversations I had with people. And I'm encouraged to see so many parents who came out to share their experiences I didn't know that was what Saline was looking like until they all kind of got in the same space.
One of the things with the kind of the current, one, I applaud Laura Washington. We had some early conversations after the incident, and it's been interesting to see, yes, we go back to that first slide, we were working on this. It certainly created a more focused approach, and I think a more effective approach of really identifying what are the specific things that we can do as a school district. And so, while it certainly was challenging and hard, I think our response to it now has really shown, like, this is where we can go, and I think we'll be much further ahead at the end of the year than we were at the start of the year had that situation not occurred. This kind of highlights some of the things that Ms. Washington talked about. The first group of parents have come to both of the community conversations sharing their experiences, and I will tell you there are two of the things that I've been struck by based on it. One is that they live in our community, they all had a story of how they actively chose to live in Saline. They knew what Saline looked like prior to them choosing and making that decision. They talked about kind of the ramifications of that decision, but they made that choice and were committed to wanting to help us get better as a community and being a part of our community. And I think that was something that was applaudable. And when we talked about, these are parents that we see every day, they're involved in these families are involved in a lot of our activities. When they came to a group, it felt different, and I think that's an important thing for us to understand, that while we always, I think, or many times feel like, oh, Saline is kind of this monolithic community or monolithic organization, that's not the case. And if you look at some of the demographic data related to our community, particularly for our school-age families, our school-age families are more diverse than the community population as a whole when it comes to race and ethnicity. So that's something for us to consider. And then ultimately, one of the issues that has come up is kind of this Saline versus Salinians versus new Salinians, and this old Saline, new Saline, and that kind of conversation has been going on for generations here in terms of the community itself. And I think that's similar to other communities. What has changed is that there's now, because of the way we're evolving as a community and changing as a community, there are now other racial and ethnic implications as opposed to just how long have you specifically resided in this community. And so that continues to be a theme, but again, it's a different theme than I think it was a decade ago when we heard some of those same conversations. So the next step for us was to kind of start to clarify, and Ms. Washington and I, she's done some research with Dr. Marks and other places. We've tried to pull in additional resources from other districts that are in similar places to us and some that are further ahead and trying to identify. And one of the clear things that we've learned is that we do need to have establish essentially a vision for systemic and strategic implementation of diversity, equity, inclusion principles over multiple years to build capacity and organizational awareness. This can't be something that, hey, we had a situation, we ran a campaign, and now we're going to move on to what is next. There needs to be some systemic and structural components to what we do in order for us to continue to grow and evolve as a community. And so, putting it out there are 4 components to that I see as necessary, and the board training to develop understanding in terms of at the board level as to some of the things we've done. I know you guys had the opportunity to be a part of the presentation from Dr. Marks. Would that be an opportunity for us to continue that process and think as a board and understand how those values and identities that we carry to the table kind of blend with what we're trying to do as an organization? To teacher professional learning, the concept of a teacher saying if something were to happen in their classroom that has a racial connotation, how would they handle it? Do they have the tools, the wherewithal to interrupt and really educate and do it in the moment and in time? And Ms. Washington, I'm going to let her tell the story about how that training can occur so that when you're in crisis, you can handle it. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I share with Scott is that, and I think this is what you're talking about, is that in every emergency situation, teachers have an emergency plan. And whether it's a fire drill, whether it's a shelter in place, whether it's a lockdown, I remember having to go through lockdown drills where our building officer told us how to barricade and what to use as weapon and what to do with your books. Like it was very intense, and we practiced over and over again so that it became second nature for us. And I kind of also look at the same thing with first responders. We look at police officers, we look at firefighters. They run toward known danger. And it's not because they're not afraid, it's not because they're not scared, it's not because they don't know we're going to see something horrible, it's because that's what they're trained to do and how they're trained to respond. Soldiers in the battlefield do experience fear, but they don't act on their emotions, they rely on their training. And in many situations when a teacher, particularly if it's a teacher in an elementary school classroom, they have this set of kids for every day versus where you're in the upper or secondary classroom where you have 150 kids every day. You are sometimes going to be caught off guard by when kids use a racial slur. It could hurt your feelings and you could experience a trauma just hearing that a kid said this or did this. But what we have to do as educators is we have to remove the shock of that and understand that the shock of that's a personal thing for you, and we can talk about working through that as an individual, but we can't be stuck in that moment where I can't believe they said that, I can't believe this is where we still are, we can't be stuck there. We have to know how to interrupt, we have to know how to respond with our training and not our feelings about what just happened. And while there needs to be an emotional connection to both kids, there needs to be a response that you have actually practice. Role play is really important in this because what could happen is you could say or do the wrong thing and you could do more damage to both kids. And that is where if you look at how teachers are trained, how teachers are educated about this, they're not taught how to respond to a white student using the N-word in your class. There's no lesson on that in college. There's no, first day of, new teacher training where that's, on the syllabus. That just doesn't happen. I think most of us assume that we're good people and we're gonna do the right thing. But you never know how you may come up with a great response tomorrow. But tomorrow is not where you need to have the great response. So it is critical that teachers feel empowered to respond appropriately, to know what to say, and actually some of that comes from rehearsing it, really role-playing, the way we do fire drills and evacuations, because it is that emergent. The damage that can be done to a student from a racial slur can have lifelong implications. And if the child who's using the racial slur is not handled properly, it can have lifelong implications for them. Both kids need to be healed and returned to learning as soon as possible, and that really relies on the adult in the room, particularly with our younger kids. And so if I could say anything here, going through the experience of understanding these issues and then practicing it as if it were emergency training helps to kind of remove the shock of, I can't believe that happened. This is this is just 2019. How is this still happening? That can't be your initial response. We have to interrupt and educate and rehabilitate and then offer reconciliation for kids, because then they can go back to doing the most important thing, which is learning. And that is for both kids. So.
The other aspect that we've talked about is kind of supporting development of student clubs. And so prior to even the high school, at the elementary, middle school, if there are students who are interested in these topics, are there ways for us to support their development? It's one of the key components as we've talked to other districts. That is a strong emphasis in terms of making sure that students have opportunities to get together, be a part of the learning that's taking place, and begin to try and kind of learn themselves from an organizational standpoint, feel comfortable with who they are in our community, and ultimately be able to focus on learning and help us all. And then the last one is a community outreach, a book discussion. There's an American Media discussion, which is a documentary. We as a community need to think about what are the things we're doing as an organization, and as a community, are there ways that we can learn as adults in our community in terms of, and because this can be such a sensitive and personal conversation, having those opportunities to kind of get involved, get information, share honest thoughts and feedback, and learn as a community is a real critical point. And if you notice, they really are looking at it, from a board standpoint, from a teacher standpoint, from a student standpoint, and from a community standpoint. We all have a role if we're going to have a systemic and strategic plan associated with that. So next steps, we're continuing to review models out there in terms of locally and regionally, in terms of what diversity, equity, inclusion committees can look like. Certainly we want broad participation from community members, from leadership, from staff throughout, and it provide a structure for future opportunities. There may be things that come to us as a community, there may be resources that we want to look at. How do we go about evaluating those? And I think of scenarios that have happened recently where if we're presented with an opportunity or an idea or a concept that could potentially be valuable to our district in terms of the DEI issues, would it be an opportunity to take that issue to a committee, have them review, discuss, evaluate what might work well for our community, because this has to be something that we're comfortable with in our community, and then make recommendations to the Board of Education for implementation. So I think that's a way to, again, we go back to the systemic and structural way, a committee associated with this. A lot of times you hear us say committee and you think, oh, you're going to kind of put it in the shelf. This is a committee where I would equate to the wellness committee, and if you remember the presentation we had a few months ago, in terms of the broad perspective that they've been working in terms of providing supports for students and staff. I envision something similar to that over time, where it'll be an effective way for us to kind of organize the work that we want to do. Continuing to have community conversations, gathering feedback, sharing progress is going to be a strong point of emphasis for us in terms of we need to continue to listen. There are more diverse opinions and thoughts and ideas out there that we need to continue to gather. The voices of our parents need to be heard, and an opportunity for us to have those conversations in maybe smaller groups to be able to kind of have a back and forth. When you get into a larger setting, if you're at a board meeting and there's public comment in the board, it's a very different role. It's much harder to have a real honest conversation and a thoughtful dialogue around these issues. So creating environments where those can take place is going to be critical. And then, ultimately, one of the things relative to our staff specifically is that to implement recruiting strategies that will help improve the diversity amongst our own staff. It's important for us. Assistant Superintendent Ellis and I have been talking about some specific strategies. I've talked with Shannon Washington about those, other districts, about how do we go about being explicit about our desire to improve our staff diversity. And the tone I'll use there is twofold. One is that there's a moral obligation for us, for the students, to be able to see representations in terms of people that look like them or have different perspectives to be able to share. There's an opportunity. We are moving our students into the world that does not look like Saline. We must prepare them effectively. And when we think about from a standpoint of the type of graduates we want to have leave our district, providing those opportunities and experiences is just critical from a learning standpoint. And so again, it kind of does come back to the learning in the end. So, questions from the board?
Fantastic. I love seeing a parent up there working with an administrator or a staff member. I'd love to see more of that. Thank you very much for coming. I love hearing from parents and other people in the community. I did K-12 in Plymouth Canton, and it's their loss. I should have called you that.
Thank you.
Just my personal opinion. And obviously would be happy to participate in any board training. And hope you really stay involved in this and look forward to more community conversations and using that energy and momentum to keep going forward.
On the November 12th conversation, I was sitting next to you, I think, and I remember toward the end we were talking about celebrating, how we celebrate in classes, and one idea that was pitched was the idea of a diversity coach. I wasn't sure at first, and it just so happens that the very next day, one of my graduate students was looking around for a paper to write at the end, and I said, why don't you do some research into that area? So I've got a really juicy 12-page paper that I'm going to share with you. And if you could just send her a little note.
I will certainly.
Appreciate that.
That is an issue that's come up. We've identified a couple of districts locally that have that, and we've talked a little bit about what would that look like. And again, I think about putting some structure in place, and that may allow us to kind of.
Well, I was looking down the list, and it board training, teacher learning, student clubs, community outreach. If we had one person, even in the district, who could address or help guide each of those groups, money well spent.
That's a good point. Actually, going through this new training, Susan and I did the WISD and meeting and learning about the other districts. Ann Arbor actually has somebody on their Board of Education that is a formal diversity officer for the University of Michigan. That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Shannon and Scott, thank you very much. And Scott, you said this becomes quite personal at times, and perhaps even more personal for me. My son, as you know, is biracial. Some of you know anyway. And he's a senior in high school, and yeah, there's been some experiences that I wouldn't have thought would have happened, but they do. And you know, I joke around a little bit. You know, some of you know, I moved to Saline early high school years, back in the 70s. And the joke was that I wasn't their diversity because there's a vowel at the end of my name, being of Italian descent. But Shannon, something you said that, you know, some words can be used that stay with you for the rest of your life. And I'll never forget being called a wop by not one of my fellow students, but by a teacher, coach. And so they stay with you. So I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I was part of the community conversation, the second one, and again was amazed by the group, a large group, and even within, like, we wanted to learn off each other as well because there was such a broad, reason why everybody was there, and there was a want to continue those conversations. So I hope, I hope we're able to create that space. So, especially community members are able to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, this is just a full presentation. I should have went now. This is going to be anticlimactic. My little update.
Our second discussion item is the bond update. Superintendent Creighton.
Yeah, was literally just to bring you up to speed in terms of, we did our first bid pack. As I said, we've got a couple of areas that didn't get covered. We have those bids out. We look to be putting our bid pack, the second group, out on Friday, which will essentially be the high school track resurfacing and the high school tennis court resurfacing. Those again will go out, and our intention will be to bring those to the board the first meeting in February for approval and for work on that. And then almost at that same time would go with the west parking lot. And so it's called the west parking lot and the connector. And essentially what we're talking about is essentially redesigning the west high school parking lot in kind of changing the flow there, adding an island, and what we're calling essentially would be a connector that would go well out in and almost over towards the stadium to create kind of two areas and allow for pedestrians, trying to get pedestrians or individuals, as you call them, individuals away from the building. If you're familiar with the pickup drop-off scenario that plays itself out on the west side of that building, and there's a lot of activity right around the door. Our intention is to improve the safety there have it and prove it out, and have a couple of what we're calling shade structures, I would call them, just essentially things that people can stand under as they get further out away from the building and allow for better flow of traffic. And so that will be going out in February and hopefully be awarded in March. And so it will be a busy summer around here. Not necessarily part of those bid packages, but part of the bond, as noted, we will be going with Wade Trim to the City Council meeting on the 14th, this coming Monday. I'm talking to them further about the left-hand turn lane. As you know, the funds associated with putting in that light would come from our bond, as they've been allocated for that. And so we're continuing to work through that process. We've been partnering with the Washington County Road Commission on that, as well as the City of Saline. There's going to be some resurfacing work done there this summer, so we're trying to do some timing with that. So any questions about the bond project for this summer in particular?
I did have one. There was a wild and unsubstantiated, perhaps, rumor that we might have trouble putting anything on our new field for graduation. Is that going to be an issue?
It's not wild and unsubstantiated. There's some discussion there in terms of what that would look like. We actually were having some emails going on about that today in terms of how that would play itself out. One of the aspects of it would be, do we want to look at a different setup and reduce the footprint, so to speak, of the actual layout? There's questions to whether or not the putting of the stage directly on it without putting anything under would void our warranty and some of the drainage things. And ultimately, what we've kind of learned, we might be okay with setting everything up there. Getting the vehicles on there to do it is a problem. And so, as Rex noted, his guys, and he did indicate their mean age to be maybe north of mine in terms of in the type of setup necessary. We've started to explore, is there a way for us to basically hire out that setup and have some folks come in and set it up for us, not using vehicles, keeping off of the actual surface itself. So we're going to continue to explore that.
Well, thanks.
So, yeah,
So that was an issue then?
Yeah, oh yeah, it is an issue. We're working through it.
Thanks.
Lastly, I will say that the other aspect of the bonded K-5 furniture purchase is coming up. That's been in the works for quite some time. We're hopeful to have that to the board here in one of the next couple of meetings. And we were actually talking about that implementation occurring the last week of school. So we're going to try and pack everything we can into this year, in the summer.
Yeah.
Sounds like fun. Any other questions? Consent agenda. Can I have a motion to authorize the following items as part of the consent agenda? A, approval of the regular Board of Education meeting minutes of December 11th, 2018. B, approval of the special Board of Education meeting minutes of December 5th, 2018. C, approval of the special Board of Education meeting minutes of December 20th, 2018. D, approval of payments for the general fund accounts payable of January 8th, 2019 in the amount of $1,410,796.72. E, approval of payment of Bond Fund Series 1 accounts payable of January 8th, 2019 in the amount of $82,798.33. F, receive and file the January Curriculum, Finance, and Human Resources reports. G, approval of the early graduation requests is submitted by Superintendent Graydon. And H, approval of the following field trips is submitted by Superintendent Graydon. Field trip number 85, the National Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. on February 1st to 3rd, 2019, and the baseball spring break trip to Worthington, Ohio on March 25th to 26th, 2019.
So support.
All those in favor, please signify with an aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, passes 7-0. Items on the next agenda.
The tentative item, the board can verify this, that the retreat was safety and security.
This is the second opportunity for public comment. Would anyone like to make a public comment? Our next meeting will be held here in the Liberty Schoolroom on January 22nd, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. Can I have a motion to adjourn the regular Board of Education meeting of January 8th, 2019 at 7:45 p.m.? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 7-0. We're done.